Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a quick review of Misery by Stephen King. What I want to do is give a brief overview of the book is about, tell you the things that I liked, and tell you the things that I didn't like. Jumping straight into it, this book follows the writer Paul Sheldon as he finishes another one of his novels, gets into a car accident, but he is saved by a passerby. It turns out his savior is also his kidnapper, Annie Wilkes, who's Paul Sheldon's #1 fan, and she's crazy, and she won't let him leave the house, and the plot kind of ensues from there. I've read a decent number of Stephen King books now. I wouldn't say I am well read on Stephen King, but certainly whenever I rarely explore the horror genre, he's been pretty much my go-to, and I have a lot of his books that I haven't read. So overall, I guess before we start talking about this book specifically, Stephen King is such an interesting author to me because of how hit or miss he is. He's the author I've read the most of that I didn't love all of their work, if that makes sense. Like usually, like if I read like a ton of one author, it's because I love like almost all of the stuff that they do. But Stephen King, like I love some of his books. The Stand is probably my favorite book of all time. I don't know why exactly. I'm due for a reread, that's for sure, but it's just always, I think about it so often in those characters. That being said, I've read a lot of Stephen King books where I just straight up didn't enjoy. Like I enjoyed them less than a lot of the mediocre books that I've read. Like I actively disliked them. The Dark Tower, the Wizard and Glass, another one of my favorite Stephen King books. But the ending of that series, particularly the last 3 books in that series, I think are quite trash. In fact, I didn't even finish the last book. I got very close and I decided I didn't really care what the ending was, so then I just Googled it just to satisfy my own curiosity, and I decided it wasn't worth that build-up, quite frankly. And I know that's a controversial opinion because some people love The Dark Tower, and I loved some of the books in that series. However, I also hated some of the books in that series. And then other ones I've read just didn't really grab onto me that much. That being said, I read Pet Sematary last year, really did love that one. And this is my first Stephen King book since then, so it's been about a year. And overall, just to give my overview thoughts of Misery, another Stephen King banger, do I say. This one I really enjoyed. It helps that it's October, that it's spooky season, but it's not really spooky in that way. I think Pet Sematary would be a great October book, but this one is more scary in like a real grounded way, where you feel like there's somebody in the world, or maybe many people in the world, that are as crazy as Annie is in this book, and it makes you fear for your life. It makes you glad that I guess you aren't famous and these people aren't lusting after you in the privacy of their own homes. But really another masterclass by Stephen King in terms of formulating these characters. I think Paul Sheldon is a fantastic character, not only for his strengths, but also because of his flaws. I think when Stephen King is firing on all cylinders, he creates perfectly well-rounded human characters in terms of their strengths, their weaknesses, their vices, and all of the above. And the writing, and so Paul Sheldon, Annie Wilkes, it's basically these 2 characters the entire book. There are some characters that sprinkle in either like in flashbacks or as like entering characters, but it's almost like a chamber play of this bedroom in Annie Wilkes' house that Paul Sheldon is trapped in. And what Stephen King does that I thought was very interesting, which isn't something I've really seen or I've really read from him compared to his other books, is he kind of plays with the form of this book a lot, not only in terms of its structure, but he does do a lot of like, Paul is very heavily medicated in some scenes. His thoughts are disconnected and unfocused. So the writing becomes a little bit unfocused, and it's kind of hard to follow like what he's talking about, what's real, how much time is passing. And it kind of creates this air of confusion while you're reading the book, which also mirrors what Paul is actually experiencing in the moment of this particular part of the story. So you kind of, the writing style itself, and keep in mind I listened to this on audiobook, even through that, and I guess maybe that helps a little bit with the narrator as well, but it kind of creates kind of discomfort from a reading perspective, or in my case, I guess from a listening perspective, and the fact that it mirrors perfectly with Paul's state of mind, it just perfectly sets the tone for that. and particularly because he is a writer, and I think, and I don't really know, like, either like Stephen King had to have had like maybe definitely a smaller scale similar experience to this with like a crazy fan, or he's just been fantasizing about that. But you could just like tell that as like a great writer like Stephen King is, to kind of put those like thoughts and almost like his processes and let Paul explain them in his own way, like his analogies and his like I guess I don't know how to describe it, not like his improv as a writer, but and I can't even remember the exact phrasing of it, but there's a moment where he's talking about like the writing exercise or like the game he used to play as a child. Paul used to play this game as a child. It's basically like an improv game, like a did they, and it's like about the believability of a story and filling in like plot holes and making sure it's like thematically consistent throughout the story, and that plays into kind of how he's writing the story within the story. And that's another big thing about the structure of this book. Paul is a writer, and he talks about that. He talks about the fame he's gained from that and the books that he's written. But the real core of this story is his series about the character Misery, which is the title name of the book. It's kind of I don't know, maybe a little bit more pulpy series, a little bit more cheesy in some ways. Not his favorite work that he's written, but by far his most popular work, which is another commentary that I feel like Stephen King is kind of implanting through the series of his commentary about like authors struggle with the artistic value of a work versus the commercial value of a work. And that's something that Paul struggles with as a character, which I'm sure is something that Stephen King has thought about a lot in his career. But he wrote this series, and he finally ended that series, and he killed off that character. And this is not a spoiler, by the way. This is very early on in the book. He finished this series off. But it turns out that his captor, her favorite character, is this Misery character. It's her favorite book. And then kind of what happens from there as she kind of gets to talk to Paul about this, and Annie Wilkes, man, is just so horrifying, and kind of like I said at the beginning, kind of in that realistic way where you can see somebody being that crazy, and kind of as you learn more about her and kind of the depths of her insanity, kind of fill her in. But what I really liked about this character is from the onset, you don't need the devious backstory of Annie Wilkes to be terrified of her, because he sets the tone. Stephen King sets the tone very early on. We're kind of thrown into the situation. Paul is confused. He's heavily medicated. What exactly happened? Where is he? What's going on? Who is this woman? The only thing you know is that he is in danger. And that's something that Paul even remarks on. He goes, it's like, I cannot, like, I'm so screwed right now. And that's instantly what you get with just her mood swings, her tempers, like what she does to Paul in different instances, and like the switching of emotions, the like bipolarness of this character. Instantly an all-time classic villain, and really, truly horrifying. And I thought the ending as well, without getting spoilers of what exactly goes down, I thought I'm glad it ended the way it did in terms of tone. I think it could have went maybe... And I guess I don't want to talk about that because I don't want to tell you which way it goes. But I'm just happy the way it ended up. I think it fit the characters, it fit the story, but it wasn't too indulgent, I guess, without saying any more. It wasn't too indulgent, which I enjoyed. But overall, just a really, really solid book. And really, really no negatives at all. I guess the only negative I would have in part 2, we really start delving into the story of the story, right? Where Paul is writing another novel while he's in captivity. So in part 2 of this story, I believe the audiobook was 4 big parts. And part 1's kind of like figuring out where he is, what happened to him. Part 2, he starts writing the story within the story. And I thought that was an interesting way, like I was saying earlier, about exploring the process of an author as he's getting into like the writer's zone and finding his craft, with also the commentary of a fan kind of giving her own input about what should be happening. Loved that part. In the 3rd part, though, as things are starting to escalate, we still have chapters that are chapters of the book within the book. As things start to get more intense in the real world, those things did start to lose me a little bit, because we're only getting random chapters of this book within the book. I don't really care about these fake characters. I thought they were used more cleverly in this part 2, whereas part 3, it's like there's so much intense stuff going on. We need to know if Paul's going to get out of this. What's Annie going to do next? And we kind of keep switching back to this book within the book. That part was my only complaint there, but overall, like these characters, all-time classic characters, and the structure, the structure of the book itself, which is not normally something I say for Stephen King. Usually just like, if I'm blown away by the book, I'm blown away by the characters and maybe like the concept. But I think the form of this one was really intrigued me the most about this one. But let me know in the comments if you read this book, if you like the book, if you've seen the movie, if the movie's any good, and what other Stephen King books are your favorite. I think I gotta do The Stand reread, but my dad also recently sent me The Running Man and The Long Walk, both which are movies. So I'm excited to read those eventually, but I'm just getting the itch for, every time I read a good Stephen King book, I'm like, man, gotta read The Stand. And I have it in my possession because sometimes I just leave it places where I don't have access to them. I leave them at my parents' house or whatever for years and I can't read it, but now I have it, so maybe I'll reread it. But anyway, enough yapping. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like the video and you want to see more like it in the future. And as always, thanks for sticking around.